I think that the reason it could be done was because he simply didn't understand that our troops would be able to do that.
We detected a submarine and it fired torpedoes at us. I made sure that I paid full respect to every single veteran who served in it.
The basic difference between ourselves and the Argentines, they were fighting for the islands and we were fighting for the islanders.
Looking at how much these guys are just still suffering, I went, let's call it off.
Nothing could be more humiliating for him and his junta than the arrival of 10,000 men without victory, without their guns, without even their bootlaces.
Paul, how are you, brother?
I'm fine, thanks, Chris. You all right?
Yes, mate, you look remarkably well. Was it 63?
63, yeah. Mm-hmm.
God,
Thanks.
I wish I had your paper round. So, Paul,
you're looking good yourself.
Oh, mate, I'll do my best. I've seen
the endurance things you do, and a lot of respect for that.
My face is normally a reproduction of how I'm living my life at the. It's amazing how wrinkles actually go away when you do all the good stuff. Brother, listen, absolutely wonderful to have you on the show. Before I go any further, it was one of our subscribers said, Chris, you really got to get this guy on your show. And unfortunately, YouTube deleted that comment before I had a chance to write down your name, sir. I think it was a sir, not a madam. So massive thank you. If you let me know who you are, I'll give you a shout out. Paul, the Falklands conflict, and I think we're going to come on and talk about other stuff as well. Very passionate in the heart of British service personnel, especially those of us that lived at that time. And I'm not just talking the people that served down there. God bless them. But, I've told this story before. My best friend who I joined the Royal Marines with, his dad led, I believe it was Lima Company into battle. He was the sergeant major down there. And my friend used to watch the news, and on the news, the list of the dead would scroll up the screen at the end of every day to who died in battle that day or on the ships. And then my buddy, he said he used to just go upstairs, run himself a bath, and he'd sit in the bath and cry. He'd have to watch the news to see if his dad had died that day. And this is why I say conflict affects everybody, doesn't it? So I'm just going to read. So you've written a book. It's called Return to Bom Alley, 1982, The Falklands Deception. 40 years on from the Falklands conflict, veteran Paul Cardin reflects on his own experiences while asking probing questions about what really went on before, during, and after those 74 days of hostility. As a 22-year-old radio operator in the Royal Navy, bad luck, mate, Paul was stationed on HMS Yarmouth when it was anchored in San Carlos Bay, known colloquially as Bom Alley. During his time there, he saw ships being bombed and sunk and watched his friends and comrades being injured and killed. Return to Bom Alley is part memoir, part critical account of the way in which the Falklands conflict was handled. Although often referred to as a war, neither Britain nor Argentina ever made a formal declaration, but the days which followed the Argentinian invasion of the Falkland Islands saw more than 900 people lose their lives, and many others left with lasting physical and mental injuries. Yes. I've met a lot of veterans who served down there, Paul, and we've done many podcasts, and we were going to do an open talk night this year. And in the end, looking at how much these guys are just still suffering, I went, let's call it off. Let's just leave the past. These guys need to move on with their lives. The book is a gripping read for anybody who wants to know more about the Falklands conflict, as well as telling his own story through diary extracts and a timeline. The author takes a thorough and journalistic approach to this period of history, asking tough questions about why and how certain decisions were made, what was really going on in the background, just what was the role played by the British government and Margaret Thatcher, what were their main motivation, and how did they use the conflict to their advantage in the years which followed. First off, mate, congratulations on writing a book. It's not an easy thing, is it?
Mm-hmm. It isn't. I did consider doing it way back, probably in the mid-'80s, and I didn't go ahead because I'd seen what happened to Clive Ponting. You know, he was a senior civil service man, and he sort of contacted Tam Dayal, who was one of the old MPs, no longer with us, about what he knew about the Belgrano and the lies that were being told about that. So I'd seen all that happen, and I thought, no, I was a bit sort of chilled from writing anything at the time, because you yourself, Chris, you've signed the Official Secrets Act, and it's pretty unforgiving, or back then it was very unforgiving if you said something out of place. So I left it 40 years, and as you know, every 10 years the anniversary comes up. So 82, 92, 2002, 2012, and every anniversary I thought I should get something out there, and get my story out there. And I finally did it this time around. And one of my motivators was while I'm still here, because time goes very fast. So I thought I better get this book out now.
Yes, Clive Ponting wrote about or released documents about the Belgrano. Was it?
That's right, the sinking of the Belgrano. There were so many questions that were unanswered about that. And even at the time when I was down there, it's the 2nd of May 1982, I thought, that's it now. It was like the point of no return when that happened. And it proved to be that, because 4 days later, the Sheffield was hit by an Exocet, and that was it. The war was on after that point.
Mm. And Paul, I suppose we should say here now, I mean, I don't think I've ever managed to get through a Falklands podcast without just bloody ending up in tears, and I'm a Royal Marine.
It's understandable.
The sacrifice that our brothers and I say sisters, because obviously there was nurses on the on the medical ships, and etc., and working back home, like friends at home. We're not in any way disparaging the commitment that people made. Yeah. But in my lifetime, so 53 years, all I've seen is a perpetual state of war with this country or this one or this one. And what we've seen in the last 20 years, the facts don't add up. They certainly seem to suit these sociopathic world leader types that just look down on service personnel as if they're just cannon fodder. And
well, yes, Yeah.
And I want to explore that, Paul, without meaning any disrespect to anybody, not the Falkland Islanders, etc., etc., because, you know, we're parents, we have people that we love in the military, and I think these questions respectfully need to be asked.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. When I sat down and started writing the book, I made sure that I paid full respect to every single veteran who served in it and everyone who's serving now. This book has no criticism whatsoever of any serving personnel, but the criticism that does come is levelled at the politicians. It's a bit like walking a tightrope. I had to make sure I wasn't criticising any veterans or anyone who knew me. You know, I wouldn't do that anyway, but I made sure that all my criticism was targeted at our leaders and at the media, you know, the same sort of people who are causing so many problems, you know, now.
Yeah. It's fair to say, mate, they're a weak old bunch, aren't they? And that's why they're in the job.
Well, they are weak. They are cowards. They're cowards because they appear to be above the law. I mean, we just have to look at Tony Blair and we can see why the hell hasn't that person, why isn't he looking out at us from behind bars right now? He should be, but he isn't. He's been knighted. So that just shows you that we're living in a sort of topsy-turvy world, and we are cannon fodder, like you say. I just wish that more veterans would look into these things rather than standing there sort of saluting the flag. Would look behind the scenes, try and fathom why they get sent to these wars. You know, the Iraq War was illegal, and I think every war since has been illegal.
Well, we joined up to support freedom, didn't we?
Yeah.
We joined up to protect our nation. And it's being more and more sort of apparent that if we call it that border, I don't mean a physical border, but, you know, the integrity of who we are as Great Britain or England, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales is, you know, they say the enemy can be within, don't they?
Yeah. Is it 57 Squadron? Is that it? Is that squadron in the army that's going on line? And
77?
77, is it? Yeah. But that just speaks volumes, really, when you talk about an enemy within. I'm not accusing them of being an enemy within, but what they're doing is looking very suspect to me.
Friends at home that might not be aware, 77 Brigade is allegedly, I don't think we're ever going to know the full details, but it's a group of like 4,000 people that just, for argument's sake, sit at a keyboard, trolling through social media sites, etc., and basically disparaging any dissenting voice, probably leaving a little comment like, "Oh, I suppose you wear a tinfoil hat, and I suppose you believe that the Earth's flat," and it kind of steamrollers over any form of intellectual debate.
Yeah, I've seen those sort of comments, and you accuse them of being bots or whatever. But you don't really know who they are, but there's been a proliferation really since that 77 Brigade came on the scene. You know, it appears to be everywhere. Yeah, 4,000 people can have a big impact.
Yes, and of course, in their minds, they probably believe they're doing it for our national interest.
Yeah. But the sort of window dressing that they put out there tells us that they are out there with our best interests at heart, that they are out to protect us. But I've got to the stage in my life where I no longer believe that. And That's happened a long time ago, actually. I mean, I switched my television off about 10 years ago. I couldn't bear watching it, So there's a lot of good stuff on the television that I'm missing, but I just can't face that 6 p.m. news coming on. It's awful. I mean, I'm probably more sensitive to being propagandized, I suppose,
Yes, I mean, more and more people don't pay the license fee now because you're actually...
Good luck to them.
If you support that stuff, you're supporting official narratives, and if you support official narratives, you're actually supporting the very thing that these people purport, if that's the right word, to be against.
Yeah, that's right.
I
had a couple of years ago, Amol Rajan. Have you heard that name? He's an Asian man, and he's very high up in the BBC sort of media world. He was on Twitter, and I made a remark. I don't think it was particularly cutting remark or anything like that, but he called me an idiot and scum. Amol Rajan, and I thought, wow, can you get away with that? So I put a complaint into the BBC, and it took me about 2 months, but it went right to the very top. Went to the very top man in the complaints department, the director, and he basically whitewashed it and said he was only sort of messing about. He didn't really mean anything by that, So that, you can, when something like that happens, you can get an inkling into how, not above the law, but how protected they are. They get into these positions and they feel they can do anything.
Well, it was the same with Paul. We're always careful with our comments on this show, simply because some of the platforms that we broadcast on would have no qualms taking us down. But if I say there was, there were certain events in New York and Washington 20 years ago, I think everyone knows that to which I refer. Yeah. And of course, most people think that two things fell out the sky, but it was actually three constructions, and the BBC broadcast the third one falling out the sky 40 minutes before it did.
Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me.
Right, which is physically, it defies science,
That's right.
And when
a court case was won on that, Chris, I don't know whether you know, a court case in this country was won by the person who took the BBC to court over that. I can't remember the details, but it's out there,
I said, look, I'm not paying your licence under Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act. And they went through the procedure. I got the court summons, went to court. They asked me if I was guilty. I said, no, I'm not guilty of having an appropriate licence because the licence isn't appropriate because I'll be funding terrorism. Because I know the BBC's covered up the true events of the day.
Because primarily, Jane's family, 9/11 from the BBC, reported 23 minutes before World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed, but it was actually fallen. So that indicated some prior knowledge that the BBC had because of the events of 9/11.
Well, I remember one chap said, look, I'm not paying my license fee because of this issue. You are clearly part of the narrative and you have no defense. You've not. Mm-hmm. And I remember going on some BBC forum and people were saying, how the hell did you have prior knowledge about what was going to happen on that day? And they put it down to it was a glitch in communication. No, it can't be. You can't predict something happening, a major event, 40 minutes before it happened and say, that was just a glitching. No, it doesn't work. It's like me saying to you now, Paul, that your local post office has just dropped to the ground, and you look outside and you go, no, Chris, it hasn't. It's still there, mate. And then literally 20 minutes later, you'd be like, Chris, how did you know that?
Exactly.
You'd want answers. So,
and the woman who gave that report, she's never been seen again. I'm not saying anything's happened to her. She disappeared from the channel.
I know. Did you see this? The satellite feed came down. She's trying to tell the whole world that this thing has just fallen out the sky, and it's literally like behind her. And then the chap in the studio, was it Nicholas Witt? No, not him, but anyway, he's going, oh, we seem to have lost the, of course, because you're 20 minutes ahead of the narrative. It was, yes. Let's get back to the Falklands then, because I know a lot of people watching probably are focused on that, but I make no apologies, Paul, for highlighting all this stuff, because we all need to learn somewhere that we've been lied to. Yeah. Not talking about the Falklands in particular now, but war in general, conflict, how it serves the elites, how it serves the military industrial complex, how much bombs, bullets, guns that they sell, which we pay for. I mean, we're seeing an example at the moment, aren't we? How many millions a day are we giving to a certain country? They're in, what do we call that? Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. But let's just go back to your own story. So HMS Yarmouth, is that a frigate?
An anti-submarine frigate, yes. It was commissioned in 1960. So it's roughly the same age as me, you know. It's quite an old ship at the time, at the time of the conflict. Yeah.
Am I right in saying it doesn't get much of a shout out in the whole Falklands narrative, does it? Because
not really, but the ones that get the bells and whistles are the Hermes, the Invincible, and the ships that got hit, you know, the Sheffield, the Coventry, that sort of thing. And as time goes on, the ship I was on, and lots of others just fade away, you know. But at the time, we were one of the busiest ships down there. You know, we were about a mile away from the Sheffield when it was hit by the Exocet, and then we obviously went to help. I was on watch at the time, so in the bowels of the ship in the communications office. So I didn't get to see, I saw the aftermath, but I didn't get to see what was going on with the fire and that sort of thing. But we went alongside and we were firefighting, but the heat that was coming off the decks was just phenomenal, and we had to pull away. As we did, and I don't know whether you know about this, it is mentioned in the book, in the diary part of the book, and I wrote it down at the time in 1982. We detected a submarine. And it fired torpedoes at us. This is just after the Sheffield had been hit by an Exocet. And we were an anti-submarine frigate, and we tried to hunt it down. And our flight commander, who was the pilot of our Wasp helicopter, he went up and he could see the thing fleeing. And we were chasing the thing and dropping depth charges on it. I think we dropped about 10. And it buggered off, it got away, and we placed a report with the MOD, and they basically said, you dreamt that, it didn't happen, you know. It's just ridiculous. They didn't want to even consider the idea that the Argentinians could perform a sort of Exocet and submarine attack all at once. Didn't want to attribute that to them, so they just said no, it didn't happen. And I think that's something that needs looking into. And there's a further complication with this story, Chris, because Argentina only had two submarines at the start of the war. The first one got scuppered at South Georgia. Can't remember the name, just escapes me. The other one was not in the vicinity of us. It was further to the north at the time, miles away to the north. So me and others have made the assumption it must have been somebody else's submarine, but whose, you know. And we've sort of assumed, was it a Russian submarine? Because they would have had a lot of interest in this war. You know, we possibly sent vessels down there, you know, to... but firing a torpedo at us, that is a big story. And this is a story that's not really out there. It's never. I'm glad I can tell it now, because it gives it just a bit more publicity, you know. the thing when we saw, we didn't see it, but I didn't see it, but we saw that as a threat to our lives, you know, so we've got to attack it and get rid of it, you know, it's us against them sort of thing. I just recently, when the book was published, I went onto Facebook and I joined the HMS Yarmouth group, and I got back in touch with a lot of the lads that I knew at the time. I hadn't spoken to them for decades, and they are unshakable in their belief to a man that a submarine, and these are the sonar guys I'm talking about now. One of them even said he recorded, it used to be recorded on tape, cassette tapes then, but he recorded the sound of the submarine torpedoes being fired, the sort of doors opening and closing, and he sent it off to the MOD as evidence, and nothing came back. You know, he told me about that in about March this year, you know. But they won't give it any, I mean, tell the mainstream media they won't say a thing about this, you know. So we're stuck with that, really. But so I've gone a little bit off the subject, I'm afraid, because we were talking about HMS Yarmouth sort of activity in the region. We were so busy. After the landings, on the day of the landings, HMS Ardent was bombed. I don't know if you recall that one, Chris, but it was clobbered. It took about 15 hits from Skyhawk, Argentinian Skyhawk jets at the back end. And I was off watch at the time, and I went up top to help out. We went alongside and we were taking all the survivors off. They all come on board with all the survival suits on, you know. And I was down at the back end, and our back end was next to Ardent. There was flames pouring out and smoke billowing out. And there were two lads stuck on the back end who were just stuck there. They couldn't get forward at all because of the flames. And they only had life jackets on. They had no survival suits on. And I'm thinking, Christ, what are you going to do? And they jumped into the sea. And I thought, they've got about 2 minutes to survive, them two. And then when that happened, straight away, over my shoulder, I heard a chopper coming, a helicopter from HMS Broadsword. And it had the guy coming down on the winch as they were flying along. And it stopped above these two fellas as they were floating off. And it picked them both up. And it was just the most amazing thing to watch. I thought, wow, hope they survive, you know. And I didn't find out until a couple of months ago when I saw a video on YouTube. And it was a fellow called Commander Entiknap. It's an unusual name. Commander Entiknap. He was one of those guys. He got to the back and jumped into the sea. And I watched him on this video, and he talked about his experiences. And he mentioned the other fellow as well. He didn't say he died, so they both survived. So that was quite that was really good news for me, you know, a couple of months ago when I saw that. And the Yarmouth, even though people don't talk about it much now, when HMS Glamorgan was hit by a land-launched Exocet, that killed about 12 or 16, was it? Sailors, and we were only half a mile away from that, and we offered to go and help, but they didn't need it because they were still moving, they were still sailing okay. It was actually the flight deck that got hit by the missile, so they were still sort of all right, you know. So Yarmouth was a busy ship.
And this just goes back to what we're saying, isn't it? How proud we are of our bloody British service personnel.
Yes,
just utter acts of selflessness to save your fellow soldiers and sailors and
totally. It's you know, Chris, it's a human thing. That's what we do. We help each other in a war. It's not just us Brits doing it, because whoever's fighting in a war will do that. They protect their brothers, don't they? You know.
Do you think that's part of the sort of scam?
In what way? Sorry.
Well, I spoke to a lot of veterans from, let's just say, let's not just say, but I have spoke to a lot of veterans from Afghanistan, and
yeah,
if you were to touch on the things that we've been talking about, immediately you get like this shut off.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you know, basically they was aware something wasn't right.
Yeah.
But the reflex action is, but I was just there for the guy on the left and the right of me. And we get that.
Yeah.
We get that as fighters, that of course you are, but of course that doesn't, it's not really helpful in the long term, addressing of like, why do we keep finding ourselves in, like you said, people love each other, Paul, they just do. Right. They just do. I'm very well travelled. I've met hundreds of thousands of people. Had a very small issue with a few of them who was on the wrong side of the tracks. Got robbed a few times, but they was just was just making their way through life, the same as the stupid things I've done in my life. But generally speaking,
I mean, they had the absolute worst of it down in the Falklands. There were bayonets out and everything, hand to hand, fighting going on down there, and that's when it's you against them, and you're gonna do your utmost to protect your buddy, aren't you? You're gonna do whatever it takes to do that. Yeah.
I studied in. I won't go into the details, but I studied in Norway for 6 months, and it was before I went to work with street kids in Africa.
Yeah.
And my best buddy at this school was an Argentinian chap called Diego. And all the time, Paul, I used to just think, bloody hell, mate, had we been a few years older, I'd be trying to kill you in your foxhole, and you'd be trying to kill me coming up that mountain.
Yeah. And I've met a couple of Argentinians this year. So one of them was actually in the war. He was one of the lads who used to arm the jets. He put the bombs on the jets, and before they flew over to bomb us. Julio, his name is, and I met him here in New Brighton, just not far away from me. And he wants to come over and live here, actually, because he hates Argentina. Because the country's in a right mess. He wants to come over and move his family and everything over here,
Well, he must appreciate the BBC, because it was the BBC that told him, "Oi, you're not arming them right. They're not. They're not going off. You need to tweak it." Insane.
That's right. Yeah, they were setting the because it unravels, doesn't it, as the bomb comes down? If you drop it too low, it won't unravel and it won't go off. So that's the thing. Yeah,
it's the same with Goose Green. I've spoken to a few people at Goose Green. The wonderful Spud Ely, who later went on to become 22 SAS, and his I believe it was Spud that was just saying the utter demoralization amongst the men when they're preparing for this secret attack. Surprise, obviously, is everything as an infantryman.
Yeah.
And what did the BBC do? They went and told the Argentinians that the Paras are coming. I mean, no wonder people don't pay a license fee, isn't it?
That's right. Stuff like that. And I don't think that was the only incident, with the BBC. There were others. I won't go into all that, but funnily enough, while I was in the radio...
The Iranian embassy siege again is a prime example. The BBC told them everything.
That's right.
But sorry, Paul. We got a lot of mutual ground on this one. Totally, even though obviously I wasn't in the Falklands. But
it's funny that embassy siege, because that was a peak during that was the peak of Mrs. Thatcher's premiership. She got in 79, and then only the next year, in April, May 1980, was that siege, and I think only one hostage was killed, and then it all ended sort of peacefully. And she was, everyone loved her sort of thing after that. But very quickly, she went like that, right down, because her economic policies started to kick in, sort of thing, and then And in 81, there were riots, and there were 3 million unemployed, and there were top sort of economists saying, whatever you do, don't put up taxes. And she did. She put taxes up, and it made everything even worse, So what that did, industry and manufacturing was decimated, not decimated straight away, but there's mines closing, the steel plants closing, and there's all these big major industrial sites closing down, unemployment shooting up. And sorry, I'm off on one here, but by the end of 81, Chris, Mrs. Thatcher had a 23% approval rating, and that is a record. It's the lowest approval rating for any prime minister ever. Even Cameron during Brexit and Theresa May, how bad they were. They never went that low, sort of thing. So that was all in the run up to the invasion, the Falkland Islands invasion. So she had about 60 MPs who wanted her out. And they're selfish, aren't they? They're all MPs who are in constituencies where they've got a narrow majority, so they're thinking, well, don't let me be kicked out next time, all this, so they wanted her out very quickly, and that's why that's where this book, she needed some catalyzing event, to rescue her fortunes, and that's what she got. And I could go into the details of that if you like, or unless you want to talk about other issues, I could talk about that stuff.
Mate, it's your podcast. Like I say, apologies if I'm talking a lot, Paul. It's just like, okay. I'm passionate for so many reasons. Yeah. I know many of the boys that were down there, and the stories. Yeah. The stories. My mate H was with 4-5, and was it 2 sisters? I think 4-5 took. If I've got that wrong, folks, apologies. I'm getting a bit senile in my old age, but. He said, Chris, you learn all this stuff in training, safety catch, change lever, or they didn't have a change lever on the SLR, but, fit your magazine, He said, when we were down there, he said, all that shit went out the window. He said, you just fucking lined up. He said, if you look behind you, he said, there was just a row of helmets. Yeah, where everyone had just took their helmet off, binned it, and put their green berets on. Yeah, he said you went up that hill, all this like firing maneuver, pepper pot, lay down, suppress. He said that was all gone. He said you just fought for your life. Yes. He said all this stow your magazine away in your pooch. We call it a pooch as opposed to a pouch, friends. He's like, no, he says, you get that fucker off. He says, you throw it as far away as you fucking can. You get in the next on and it's insane, mate. Yeah. And I tried to get H on the podcast, and he said, Chris, I can't do it, mate. I can't do it. He said, I'm 60 years old and I've just been diagnosed with PTSD. Oh, right. He said, I've carried it all these years. He said, I can't. He said, me and so many of the lads can't go to remembrance. We can't, we just want nothing to do with it all. Yeah. Just the stories of just bravery, lads, like literally messing themselves as they yomped along because, like, if you couldn't keep up with a march and you sat down for two, and they would just have to say, "Look, we've got to leave you," the company's got to keep going, or the unit's got to keep going. This is what H's words. He said, "Chris, we'd give them as much ammunition as we could, and then we'd just leave them." And okay, if they're lucky, a chopper might fly over and pick them up, right? Or a vehicle in the rear who's got grid reference might be able to pick, but basically, leaving them to fight for their life, you know. And
some of those lads, I know they've been trained for it, very well trained for that. But the young lads, some of them are not long out of school, really. You know, I mean, on our ship, for example, there was a lad, you join at 16, you can join at 16 and a half, like I did. And this lad, I think he was a cook, a chef, whatever. And I saw him in the passageway once, and somebody was comforting him. He was just crying. He'd left school, joined the Navy, done his training. This is in the run-up to the invasion that he's doing all this. And it was just timed. He joined the Yarmouth, and next thing you know, he thought he was going on this deployment that we were going on to the Far East. And he's bloody going to war. He's 16 and a half. The poor kid. And the worst thing was when we got back into Rosyth, where we were based, in Scotland. His family will have been there. My family were there. Everyone's families were there on the quayside. And we're all off to the pub for a drink. He couldn't have a drink. He's only 16 and a half, you know what I mean? So you've got to ask that question, are young boys old enough for that sort of thing? You know?
Well, it's the old cliche, isn't it? If you weren't allowed to join up until you were 50, nobody would. Well, I mean, some would, you know, some still would. But are you familiar with in the build-up before the Argentines landed, that there was British Special Forces on the island, and that the islanders kept seeing like people pop up in ghillie suits, you know, camouflage suits, which kind of hinted that obviously somebody somewhere knew what was just about to.
Wow, I'm not familiar with it, Chris, I'm afraid. No.
Yeah, we've got. Let me just.
Sorry.
No. You
the
go
settled version of events, you know, which is questionable, tells us that the first sort of inkling that the government got that there might be an invasion was a scrap metal company, an Argentinian scrap metal company, landed in South Georgia, and they were honouring a contract. They'd been called in there to dismantle a whaling station on South Georgia. But when they were there, they raised an Argentinian flag, you know, and that news of that got back to the UK, you know, back to Downing Street. And that was the first sort of inkling they had. And this was in, I think, what will it have been, about late March 1982, so a couple of weeks before the invasion. But I hadn't heard about Special Forces potentially being there before the invasion. No.
Well, if we think about it logically, the notion that Argentina could have put this plan together where they're going to retake the Falklands, and like you say, the first stage is under the guise of taking this whaling station down on South Georgia.
Yeah.
So looking at my map here.
Although I should jump in here, Chris, and say they'd originally planned to invade in September 82, because that's when the summer started. It was this whaling thing that caused them to bring the whole thing forward to April. And April was probably the worst time because we were just going into winter then. Like April, May, June. The sea is starting to freeze over down there then. You know, it just... so, sorry, I put it in there, but...
No, it's fine, mate. It's fine. The point I'm getting at is, like, knowing what we know now about intelligence, that there's moles, there's spies everywhere, there's people that have got dual allegiances, there's people with dual passports, blah, blah.
Yeah.
What, like they didn't know? Like British intelligence didn't know that was going to... This would explain why... I think it was Ricky Phillips, folks, who's been on the podcast. He wrote a book called The First Casualty.
He's banned me on Twitter. He's blocked me on Twitter. Yeah, Ricky D. Phillips. Yeah.
Yes, mate. I'm not at liberty to talk about my guests. I just think it's unprofessional. But let's just say you know, there was a whole raft of shit that came with that podcast.
Yeah.
I got attacked by hundreds of Argentinians.
Yeah.
Because for a start, they're all quite like brainwashed about Las Malvinas, aren't they? You know, they're taught it in schools, etc., but they particularly react to that book. It's called The First Casualty because it makes a lot of claims. And it's that thing that the truth is always somewhere in the middle. For example, what Ricky did highlight, I believe, was how fiercely the Royal Marines detachment down there fought.
Yeah.
You know, they really did hold these guys off with no fatalities to themselves. Over overwhelming odds. I believe South Georgia was the similar situation, and they all got removed, sent back to, I believe it was Ascension Island or somewhere in Chile. I've been in Chile. I think I know. Was it the capital? I'm not. Anyway, the Royal Marines. Yeah, the Royal Marines once removed to Santiago. Apparently, the bar bill for the night was something like £3,000. Yeah, which the government quietly paid. Right? Yeah,
that was a cheap night, was it?
These boys went through a lot, you know.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand, Paul, they never surrendered.
Yeah.
Okay. The governor, was it Sir Rex Hunt?
Yeah.
He negotiated a ceasefire, right? Something completely different. Okay. And all of this was hushed up. The fact they put up one hell of a scrap was hushed up. Yeah. All, you know, just political shenanigans going on there that we don't know the truth to this day. But after I had Ricky on the show, my God, we just got hit by it's the most downvoted podcast I've ever done. And that's because of the Argentinian quota.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Ricky Phillips does present the government line, if you like, the British government line, right down the line, you know. Sir Lawrence Freedman is the main sort of Falklands War historian, and he's the same, you know. That's why he's a sir. For people watching, there is a film by Oliver Stone that I don't know whether you've seen it, but it's called Ukraine on Fire.
On Fire, yeah.
And this came out before February this year, so before the war, well before. And it goes into the history of Ukraine and how I think it was 200,000 Jews were murdered by the Ukrainian government in the Second World War. And there was a big Nazi party, and there have been Nazi parties ever since. So even to call people neo-Nazis is probably a bit wrong, because they sort of died in the wool for years, Nazis, you know. And I've noticed that a lot of this is obviously being covered up by the coverage doesn't address it at all, you know. So people only get half the story. They think this conflict started when Putin invaded in February this year. Well, no, it goes way back. And there are places out there on the internet where you can get the full hit on what is actually been happening and what is being covered up, you know.
And even Oliver Stone's narrative is, I've seen that, you know, I've watched everything I can on Ukraine because I just believe in being informed.
Yeah.
Going back to Stefan Bandera, his arrest, how he still controlled things from inside prison. But like you say, there was a significant number of people in Ukraine that fought with Germany, et cetera. Also, you got to remember that Oliver Stone, was he not responsible for Platoon?
I think he was.
Yeah, Platoon. So what you've got there, and this is like levels of understanding, Paul, we need to get to if we're going to create a better future for our kids, right? And Platoon, it started off with Rambo, First Blood, right?
Yeah.
I'll state hands down now, one of my favorite films, right?
Yeah.
What they did is after Vietnam, the popularity of war was zero.
Yeah.
They faced riots in the States. They were, you know, people with the service personnel were getting called baby killers and all that, you know, no one respected. Okay, it's not their fault. They were just, you know, doing for president and country, not their, but the tide against war had changed. People were like, no, we don't need it. We need peace. We need love, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, that poses a big threat if you run a military industrial complex globally and your war is part of your, can we say, new 1, 2, 3, 4 world order.
Yeah.
You need people buying into this good against it. So they very cleverly started to bring out in the media a different type of narrative. And it started, to my knowledge, it started with Sylvester Stallone's First Blood, which is an incredible film. And it really did highlight the veterans' kind of plight. But what it was doing was saying, hey guys, like, yeah, you hate what happened in Vietnam, but like, look at it from this individual's perspective, what this guy went through. He's a war hero. He's a Green Beret. He's Congressional Medal of Honor. He's been behind enemy lines. He can eat stuff that will make a billy goat puke. He's, you know, he's got these torture things across his, and very subtly, Paul, they're indoctrinating the public into loving the role of the veteran. Okay.
Yeah.
At the same time, you've got music coming out in the charts. No, 19. You know, the average age of the combat soldier in Vietnam was 19, right? I don't know if that's substantiated. It doesn't matter. But again, they're trying to make you feel for these young men. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't. But what I'm saying is it ain't for genuine, you know, it's very disingenuous.
Yes.
And then you had songs like A Big Marine Named Camouflage, you know, and again, grabbing the public psyche, putting them into this individual to see them as heroes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, after First Blood, then you had your wave of Vietnam films. Hey, stop thinking of war in political terms. Think of it as the individual. These guys, they're basically boys. They're sent over there. They're having to dig their own shit away and camp out in the jungle in this torrential rain. And they never know, you know, a twig snaps. Does that mean they're going to, you know, it's a very clever narrative, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, but how many, I challenge anybody watching now, how many people have ever said it to you in this way? You know, how many people have ever just said what I said? Nobody
has said that to me in those terms. I've got to say for myself that I've always tried to avoid those sorts of films because I know that the reasoning behind it is a psychological one, like you say. You know, it's not just entertainment. You know,
I take it, Paul. Sorry to keep talking on, but this is really important we understand this. Off the back of this genre, you got your thank you for your service, sir. Can I buy you a cup of coffee, sir? Right? Yeah. And you see that out and out brainwashing in youngsters today because people say to me, thank you for your service. And I'm like, dude, you don't know me.
Yeah.
Had you known me when I served, you probably think I was a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
And like, what is it you're thanking me for? I just did a good job because I was homeless living in my car when I joined up, and joining the military seemed like a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, and right. that is the culture that this power elite have managed to craft off the back of a war that was an out and out failure, cost the lives of thousands upon thousands of young American men. which set the public against war.
Yeah.
They slowly dripped it back in, very cleverly, for people to love war.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
And then we've seen the last 20 years. It's
And Chris, when you say about people being recruited into the Army, Navy, or Air Force, they've always been very, very clever about how they go about recruiting. And it's not just adverts between the TV programs; it's in the TV programs as well. Like my example, that I've said this before. I was 10, so it's 1969. I think Neil Armstrong had just landed on the moon, and not long after that, I put the telly on and Blue Peter came on. And you remember John Noakes?
I do.
He was a daredevil. He'd do anything, wouldn't he? And he took a camera crew down to HMS Ganges, which was the Navy's training establishment in Suffolk. And that's where all the young lads joined, all the 16-year-olds, that's where they all joined. And anyway, I put the telly on and Blue Peter came on. John Noakes was there. And you saw this huge mast. It was 140 feet tall, big white mast. And they had all these sailors lined up around the bottom of the mast. And the Royal Marines band was playing music, and they started slowly going up the rigging, And John Noakes was there with the young lad and right at the front, and their destination was the top, right to the very top. I thought John Noakes was going to be the man who got onto the very top, but it wasn't. It was this young lad. And at the top of the mast was like a blue wooden disc about a foot in diameter. And this brave young 16-year-old gets up, standing on top of it, stands to attention and salutes, And I was just, wow, that is just amazing. And that's what, watching this young lad, swaying in the breeze, 140 feet up, I thought, wow, that's just amazing. I want to do that. And 6 years later, I joined. So that's the effect. That's the effect of that sort of propaganda, isn't it? I wouldn't have been the only lad deciding to join that day. There would have been probably hundreds, maybe thousands, So,
mate, just for our audience out there, I know what they're like. We've got to say when Neil Armstrong landed on the television, not on the moon.
Yeah.
Otherwise we're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the Falklands, and I'm really in two minds here, Paul, because on the one hand, I'm fascinated to hear your story as a 22-year-old down there, but also on the other hand, I'm fascinated to hear like the substance of your book. So let's take that second bit first.
Substance.
At what point then, and I'm just going to let you talk now because I've talked enough. I do get that. At what point did you start to question the narrative, and what did you discover?
When I realised where the Falkland Islands were, that was the first sort of misgiving I had over Thatcher's decision to send 30,000 sailors, soldiers and airmen 8,000 miles, because there were only 1,800 Falkland Islanders at the time. It's gone up since, it's about 3,000 now. But there were 1,800 at the time, and that didn't stack up for me. Not really. If there'd been 1 million sort of Falkland Islanders, and maybe, it was worth doing that, but just 1,800. So straight away I was thinking, what is the real reason for this, for sending me and all my mates, down to the Falkland Islands? And if we can just repeat what I was saying before about Thatcher being elected in 79 and the embassy siege, and then her economic policies, which were very tough and unforgiving on the working class. We had all that going on. She was very unpopular, and a 23% approval rating. And then, in my opinion, she needed something to turn her situation around, because she'd only been in a couple of years, and it looked like she was going to be on her way out very quickly. So my position is that this event wasn't as one-sided as we've been led to believe over the last 40 years. I talked about the sort of mainstream settled version of events that people like Ricky D. Phillips don't like you to question, Now, I can go
Can
into...
I just say, mate, I speak to a lot of people. They're all the same, mate. They've just got this blinkered one-sided. It's not that they're bad people. It's just they don't, you know.
I know that. I realise that, Chris. Yeah,
to become an enlightened person, you have to have the ability to hold two opposing thoughts in your head and possibly ascribe to neither of them.
Yeah.
But we don't see this with left brain thinking. We see this, you know, this is a narrative you're taught in school. I'm going to go with it for the rest of my life. And if nothing happens on someone's life journey to chuck a pickle in a frigging apple barrel,
like a spanner into the works.
Yeah, like in my case, it was chronic addiction, and I had to like start working stuff out because otherwise I was going to die. Right.
Okay.
But of course, a lot of people don't have that in their life, so they only know this childhood narrative, and that becomes their that becomes their thing. And so, what you're saying, Paul, is more realistically in that kind of scenario, political talks kind of could have taken place first.
Yeah. Well, I'll go into what was being concealed from the public by the Conservative government at the time. The first thing was during 1980, Mrs. Thatcher and her cabinet ministers were having trade talks with the hunter, the Argentine hunter. And these went on in 1981 when Galtieri was elected. So what Thatcher was actually dealing with Galtieri with these trade talks and trying to sort of forge cooperation into the future. So it's never talked about, Chris, you know. So that's something that needs to be said. And then we're doing arms deals, Britain and Argentina. We were selling, even back in the 70s, we were selling destroyers, which are quite a big piece of kit. This was during the Labour government in the 70s. We were selling them to Argentina. And you could say it's 8,000 miles away. It's not going to affect us. But, you know, it's still going on. And then in 1981, Mrs. Thatcher brought out something called the British Nationality Act. Up until that point, the Falkland Islanders had been recognised as Britons, okay? When she brought this act out, it wasn't just the Falkland Islands, but it was lots of overseas dependencies. They all became like overseas dependents. I'm not sure what the exact term is, but a crucial clause in this act was they would be barred from entering the UK. So nobody ever talks about this. But this is in 1981, just before the invasion. So you see that.
Do you mean in terms of like they wouldn't be denied a passport, would they? Because how would they be barred?
They could no longer apply to go to the UK like they could in the past. That's the way it was. As Britons, they could travel, you know, from the Falklands to the UK, probably backwards, you know. So she limited the scope of their travel by saying you can no longer come back here and retire in the UK or whatever. You can't do it anymore. So that goes against everything she ever said after the invasion, which was the Falkland Islanders' interests are paramount. That was the stock quote. Every time a camera was put in front of her, she would come out with that, you know. It was just repeated until it got drummed into us, you know. But that goes directly against what she'd been doing in this act only months before. That's what I'm trying to sort of say.
Yeah.
And then in 1980, she sent a foreign minister called Nicholas Ridley. I don't know if you remember that name. Yeah. He was the sort of hammer of the miners later on. He closed all the mines later on. But she sent him on a top secret mission to Switzerland to meet Argentina's deputy foreign secretary, Commodore, somebody who I can't, you know, the name escapes. But they went to the Hotel du Lac, a big posh hotel in Geneva. Nobody knew a thing about this. And this was to talk about a 99-year leaseback deal, similar to what went on in Hong Kong. Do you remember that in 97 when Chris Patton had to hand over Hong Kong very reluctantly to the Chinese?
And can I just say something very quickly there, right?
Yeah.
The lease on Hong Kong was only ever for the Northern Territories.
Right.
So the Kowloon Peninsula, the island was always British, right?
Oh.
And I lived in Hong Kong at this time of just before the handover.
Yeah.
The Hong Kongese, just made that term up. They didn't want it. They didn't want to be back under communist China.
Yeah.
They was a land of freedom and opportunity and capitalism, and let's make money any which way we can.
Yeah.
And it was only the Northern Territories that were ceded under this lease. The island was British.
I never knew that.
And after Patton's governorship over there, they handed it all back.
Right. Okay.
And they never should have done it anyway, despite this thing, because what happened 100 years ago ain't the same as what is happening today.
Yeah.
They should have stood up for the people of Hong Kong, and we've seen what they've been through now. They're still having to, undergo all these restrictions and What
do you think was behind that, Chris? Because it just seems like a ridiculous thing to do if what you're saying is right,
I think to people that haven't been through the mill, mate, life is cheap. They don't give a they could not give a they don't care. To them it's to them it's like, let's appease China because it's a massive growing superpower, and we want to be seen to be on good terms with them. In fact, economically we want to be on good terms, and they sold all those people down the river, mate.
Okay. Right.
But
okay. Sorry, I didn't realise that, Chris. I'll have to, when we finished, I'll go and have a read of that. Yeah, that sounds fascinating, to be honest. Yeah, I'll have a look at that.
It's ridiculous, mate. It's like, I can't think of a good simile or analogy, but it's like giving the Isle of Wight over to France because something 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, what do the people in the Isle of Wight think?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Where was I? I was on Nicholas Ridley's mission to Switzerland, and the 99-year leaseback deal. And what would have had to happen under that leaseback deal was all flag masts in the Falkland Islands, outside, say, Government House, they would have had to fly a Union flag and beneath it an Argentine flag. That would have been agreed going forward, type of thing. So when the Falkland Islands, they tried to keep it secret. The Falkland Islanders did know about it, and Ridley had to fly all the way down there and see what their opinion was about it. And they gave him very short shrift. They allowed him to speak and all that, but they gave him very short shrift. Kind of gave him the bum's rush and sent him on his way. And off he went back to the UK. So that didn't work. And then it got voted down in Parliament as well. So, but what they did with Ridley, they kept it secret, and they tried to put a cover story out saying that Nicholas and his wife had paid a visit to Switzerland to do some watercolour paintings of the fantastic lakes. That was the sort of cover story that they put out to the media. They come along and said, "What's Ridley doing going to Switzerland?" That was the story, sort of thing. So, but the next thing, defence cuts. You probably know about this. Prior to the invasion, there were sweeping defence cuts, mainly that clobbered the British Navy, and it upset Admiral Leach. Yeah, Admiral Leach. He said, "Look, I've got a navy here, and it needs to be able to react. if something happens somewhere and it affects British interests, I've got to be able to send my vessels at the drop of a hat. If these cuts go ahead, I'm not going to be able to do that. What are you doing? Type of thing. And she wouldn't entertain him. She wouldn't even give him a meeting or anything. And then included in those cuts was the HMS Endurance, the guard ship, the very guard ship for the Falkland Islands, you know. It makes you question, what did they know? You were saying before, did they know before the invasion? But they were cutting the ship, you know. And then Lord Carrington, who was the Foreign Secretary, piped up saying, look, HMS Endurance is not just a symbol of defence. It's also a political symbol that provides reassurance to those islanders and tells them that we're there. Should anything happen, we're there to protect them. And she's saying, decommission it, get rid of it, you know, mothball the thing. So that's the other thing. And all these things I've just listed.
Can I just come in there, just on a personal point of view? Well, it's not personal. I'm sure a lot of people. It's also a survey ship.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. For the tokenistic amount of money cost to run it is, you know, we're probably paying that to Ukraine every day now, right?
Yeah.
But also it was Endurance was Shackleton's ship, wasn't it?
Yeah,
an absolute.
It was the original,
an absolute legend of.
It's symbolic in many ways.
Yeah, of exploration, and a guy that just really was a hero. Rescued all his men off Elephant Island.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even be on the table to get rid of that. That's weird. That's the, you know, that's the backbone of British exploratory spirit. But
exactly, and in a way, it was the biggest sign to Galtieri, combined with all the other things I've just listed, to make him think that any invasion would probably be uncontested. You know, he could go in and probably just take it and just relax and, you know, move part of the population over and all that. And, you know, obviously that didn't happen. My opinion is that Thatcher laid a trap for him and he fell right into it. That's what the book goes into in a lot more detail. Hell of a lot more detail. I mean, this is only 168 pages, but I've crammed a hell of a lot into it, you know. You could probably read it in 2 hours, you know. But that's it, really. And just to say that the 30-year rule has now become the 20-year rule. So politicians are not given as much leeway these days. But back then, Thatcher had everything we didn't know, everything that was concealed would stay that way for 30 years. And it's a huge benefit for any politician or cabinet or whoever. You can do what they like as long as the press doesn't find out they're doing it. Keep stum for 3 decades, you know. So the invasion came after that, and our ship was in the Mediterranean when we heard about it. I was the first person to know that we were not going on our Far East deployment. We were off to Singapore, Malaysia, you know, probably lots of exotic locations that you've been to. I'm sure you have, but I never got to them. You know, we were on our way to Naples, and we were about a couple of hours out, and I was stood in front of the teleprinter. I was in charge of the starboard watch team of communicators, and I was stood in front of the teleprinter, and this message starts coming out, flash message, you know, top presidents, and I ripped it off, and it said, turn around, go back to Gibraltar, rearm, refuel, take on stores. After you've done that, go and join the HMS Hermes battle group in the Atlantic, and then sail south. You know, so that was the first person to know, and I was thinking, I was only 22 then. I was thinking, what should I do with this message? You know,
wow.
What can I do with it? I thought I'd better be responsible here, and I marched up up top to the bridge and gave it to the first lieutenant, and he said, "Thanks, don't breathe a word." So that was that. I think within a few hours we were turning around and we were back to Gibraltar. And funnily enough, when we got to Gibraltar, talk about being ready for battle. Every ship must have been like this. It sank in for a lot of us that this was the real thing, the real deal, because they started issuing us with dog tags. So we had these dog tags around our necks with our blood type, our service number, our name. And we're thinking, Jesus, if something happens to me, they'll be able to identify me. Jesus, what's going to happen to me, type of thing. So it really sank in then that this was going to be real, unless the peace proposals sort of headed it off, you know. So then we started sailing south, and Alexander Haig was the American Secretary of State or Foreign Secretary, and he was a sort of go-between of the two nations. And he'd be. Well, I was in the communications office, so I knew what was happening. I'd have the radio on, you know. I'd have the BBC on. You know. Back when there used to be more sort of truth coming out of the BBC, we'd have that on. We'd have the World Service on, you know, and then for a bit of balance, we'd have Voice of America on as well. You know? So we'd have two lots of propaganda coming out, one in each ear. But anyway, we'd hear these peace proposals and we'd follow them as they came out and as they sort of looked promising. Because everyone on the ship didn't want to go to war. Some of them did. Some dickheads wanted to do that, gung ho and all that. But most of us didn't want to do that, you know. And so the important peace proposal that I always point to was the Peruvian one. It came from President Belaunde, who was the president of Peru. And this is it came to fruition at the end of April. So all the ships were down there by then, you know, the Invincible, Hermes, we were all down there, and we were all inside the exclusion zone, which was like 200 nautical miles radius around the centre of the Falklands. We were all in that zone. And this peace proposal was a 7-point plan, and it was sent from Peru by the British ambassador Charles Wallace. He sent it by telegram to London on the 1st of May, 1982. On the 2nd of May, 1982, at about 5 o'clock local time, 5 p.m. local time, the Belgrano was sunk.
The advice was that this was a danger to our ships, particularly to the whole of our carrier group. Don't forget the only air cover we had was from Hermes and Invincible. That was the advice, and so indeed we altered the rules of engagement to enable the Belgrano to be sunk.
So that peace proposal was sent 17 hours before the Belgrano was sunk. Now, you may have seen this. There was a lady called Diana Gould who about a year later challenged Mrs. Thatcher on a BBC TV programme called Nationwide. And she asked Mrs. Thatcher why she hadn't acted on that peace proposal. She hadn't put out a statement or anything on that peace proposal. Why did the Belgrano get sunk while that peace proposal was under scrutiny, you know? And she said, Mrs. Thatcher said, we didn't receive that message until after the attack. Okay. So my ears went up straight away as a communicator. It's there in seconds, you know yourself. Telegram, it's there in seconds. So what happened, you know? I mean, it may have arrived in Northwood, which was the main sort of HQ north of London. That is where the telegram may have arrived. And a motorcycle guy may have gone down to Downs. Even so, it's not going to take him 17 hours to get to Downs Street, you know. So that is a question for me that has never been answered. And I don't know whether Ricky Phillips can answer that, or Lawrence Freeman, because when I put the question to them on Twitter earlier this year, they blocked me. They didn't want to know. They don't really want to hear that settled version of events being questioned. So that's what happened with that peace proposal. And I mean, I can talk about the belt, unless you want to say something.
Well, I just want to come in here because
yeah,
we're going to talk about the oil rights down there as well. You know, Coalite was the company. I believe Dennis Thatcher was I don't know if shareholder's the right word, or
in the Falkland Islands company.
Yeah. We're going to come on to that and all this, but I do want to say, I just want to acknowledge here that when you saw the Argentines invade, oh my God, how patriotic were we? It seemed like the bloody right thing to do. Get down there, smash them in the nose.
Yeah.
F you, don't you ever come on, we are Great Britain.
Yeah.
And it's like the Sergeant Major at the fight at Government House.
Yeah.
I believe it's the Sergeant Major, might have been a colour stripe or something, but the Argentinian, when they're all like, holding each other off, the Marines are in there in Government House. They smash the windows out. They're giving it good with their SLRs at the invasion force. And this is incidentally, friends at home, this is in a film called an Ungentlemanly Act. Okay, I actually worked with people whose characters were in that film.
Yeah. Right.
In fact, one of them was an armourer I worked with, and in the film, he's giving it good to the Argentinians out the window, and the major of the Marines, Major Mike Norman, went, "Marine so-and-so, would you just not that, whatever that Argentine is doing, let him live," right? Because he's trying to think. Right? It's almost a bit of a comical. That was Harry for any of my Marine brothers out there that are wondering. But anyway, what the point I want to get to is, it's so easy to get caught up in that. I don't know if hedonism is the right word of right. How dare you?
Yeah.
And yes, we are going to sail 8,000 miles. And yes, the public are going to come out and support. And yes, these boys are heroes and and but what I want to say is, like, that don't mean so much if you lost your husband down there, or you lost your father.
Yes.
I'm sure as a child now, and I speak to the children of Falklands dead, and they're struggling to this day. They still are battling trauma. Many of them won't come on the podcast. They're just like, I can't deal with life, Chris. I can't deal with life. There's no way I can come on a podcast, right? This is deep trauma. And I just want to say, if you see it from that perspective, then suddenly all the rah, let's go and scrap, let's, rule Britannia. There is a different narrative in there. That needs to be acknowledged, because if there was a route to peace that we ignored, a peaceful settlement, sanctions, then all this becomes relevant, Paul, doesn't it?
I think there could have been a route to peace. I think we are our own worst enemies if we fall into the trap of becoming like gung-ho, let's go and get them, all this stuff. That's what our politicians want. They want all that flag waving, and that's what they did at the time, because it takes attention away from the serious issues about why are we fighting a war anyway? Why don't we try and critically think about what's going on and what's motivating our leaders, Because if we fall into that trap, we're just serving their worst instincts by doing it. I think that goes for anyone, whether it's Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher. We're just doing their bidding, and we will become that cannon fodder that they want if we fall into that trap. And so will our children, and so will our grandchildren, if we don't stop the wars. You know, we've got to do that. We've got to. I've gone into this in the book as well, into this sort of thing. I'm not an academic. I've done it in my own way. I can't go into I'm not capable of going into the really close detail, the diplomatic sort of side of things, but I can do it as somebody who was there, you know. I think that gives me an advantage because I went through it, whereas Ricky Phillips was being pushed around in a pram in 1982, so he's at a disadvantage, you know, when he's giving his version of events, and that's not to deride him at all, you know. That's just to state the facts. Anyone who went down there and survived and was lucky, they've got a story to tell, and that goes for everyone who lost somebody as well, because they felt the true impact of that war more than I did, because they've lost their dad, you know, or their brother or their son. So it's a big issue, that one, but we need to take a step back. We can't just be gung-ho.
Yeah, we get our mind fogged by bravado, nation. I'll touch on this a bit later, Paul, as well, because as anybody that's watched the podcast, the biggest thing in my life has been becoming an enlightened individual. I didn't know what the shit that was when I was a serviceman, right? Yeah. I was too busy thinking, like, you know, should I spend £2,000 on a mountain bike, or you know, should I go to Thailand again? Right? But it's become a massive thing. And for friends listening, this is nothing to do with religion. If you think that, you need to learn more. It's not about that. It's understanding who we are in this place, in this time, in what is essentially a multiverse. And are we going to waste time? Me, for example, like, should I go to war with Paul? Well, no, because that's nonsense, because Paul is just me experiencing life in his body. Okay. Yeah. It's a very clever machination or evolution of the universe is that it managed to create intelligent life. And what these elites do is they hide all that from you. So they don't tell you that Paul is me and I am Paul. What they tell you is Paul's got a T-shirt, he's got some offensive slogan, therefore I need to attack him, and I'm going to try and destroy you, Paul, and your family. I'm going to dedicate my life to making yours a miserable. Whereas the actual reality is actually Paul's me and I'm Paul. So I love Paul massively. I want him to have like the best life ever, because he's just universe experiencing itself in a separate body. And these elites, mate, they've been lying to us for far too long. And this goes back thousands of years. We talked about this earlier, didn't we? Yeah. This goes back thousands of years to the money supply. Yeah. And I'm not afraid to wake people up to this, you know? Yeah. I'm not afraid to wake people up to this. And this is what true warriors do. Right. Yeah, and I ain't got time. I've not got time to be on this planet as a parental figure and not be a warrior, because I don't want to be a wimp. You know, I don't want, and no disrespect, a lot of people are quite naive, but when you go along with official narratives because you're just scared to actually say the truth, that you're a wimp. Okay. It's just, you know, you got to man up a bit or woman up a bit, because the children always come first. It's just that simple. Totally. But before we come on to that, we do need to acknowledge was it Coal Light Limited
Yeah.
which was an energy company that owned all the rights around the Falklands. And
Yes.
it has been alleged, and I don't know if we can get evidence of this. Friends at home, if you can, please send it to me. But that Dennis Thatcher was a shareholder in this company. Well, that's what we call conflict of interest.
It's a total in-your-face, wow, you know, shouting and screaming conflict of interest. The Coal-Light Company owned 40% of the land on the Falkland Islands. So the sheep farms, you know, 40% of all the sheep farms were owned by the Coal-Light Company. So that's a private interest straight away. The other 60%, 50% of that was owned by absentee landlords resident mainly in the UK. So that's 90% of Falkland Islands land, all the sheep farms, everything owned by somebody else and not the Falkland Islanders. Now that is a very, very big issue. And it's the first one that I sort of refer to in the book, I think, yeah.
So just to come in there, Paul, just so we're clear on this. So we're not talking about a war for people.
No.
And their land and their, you know, maybe it's their birthright or because they're born there or they're
tenants.
We're talking about a land that is actually owned, as you just summed up, 50% of the land in the Falklands is owned by one company.
Yep.
And
40,
another 25% of that land through the intricacies of business, the way business operates. So we're talking about, it's not a fight over a land for people.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it is obviously in the media, but in reality, it is also, or in reality, it's a fight over a land that's owned by a private corporation. That just that just adds so much more to the narrative.
Yes. The other thing about this, Chris, is that was not reported at the time. So we were given a false illusion that the Falkland Islanders owned their land. They didn't. 90% of it was owned by private interests, whether they were absentee landlords or the Coal-Light Company.
Yes.
That's what we were fighting for when we were sent down there. Okay, Chris, one thing we should add to all that is with these private companies that owned 90% of the land, it changes the status of the people who were living there. They were presented to us as British people, suffering an invasion. They were that, but they were actually working tenants because they were working for these private companies down there. They didn't actually own the land that they were working on. It was those private interests that owned the land. And this was a fact that was never brought out, by the BBC or by any of the media or the newspapers at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that puts a big spin on it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a spin, Paul. It's just not ever going to get talked about other than in conversations like this. And yet it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's frustrating for me because when I was on Twitter talking to the historians of the Falkland Islands War, they didn't want to discuss these issues. They were just too, what's the word? I don't know. Because they were counter to their own output or their own narrative, I suppose, then they must be untrue. What sort of a position is that to take up? If you've got an inquiring mind, you've got to listen to all voices. It is a fact. They are facts. So deal with them rather than closing people down, sort of thing.
Do you think that's because people, you know, they get these in narratives, they get them sort of entrenched in their minds,
Yeah.
and then they start to make money off them?
Yeah, I don't think it's just money, but it's loyalty to who they serve as well.
Loyalty.
Yeah.
Not wanting to upset the apple cart.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is that. Yeah.
Whereas this whole podcast, and I say it again, it's about the children. What kind of world do we want for the next generation? One in which we're not allowed to question things. One in which we're not allowed to bring new information to the table that people might not be aware of.
Yeah, that's right. But you and I, Chris, people of our age, you know, okay, I'm a little bit older than you, but you and I remember the old way of doing things pre-2020, don't we? It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even normal. You can't even call it the old normal, really. It wasn't normal. But this new thing that's coming in, what the hell is going on? It just doesn't, what's the word? For want of a better word, it doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense to people that are not aware of the agenda. And this is, you know, called it lots of things, but referred to as the new world order. Which is bolstered by all these kind of, let's call them steering groups, goes back to organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group. Now we're seeing a lot coming from the WEF, the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, we were basically unheard of before all this, weren't they? They were there. They've been there since the 70s, is it? Well,
yeah, sure, I think it was like 71 or 73 that Klaus Schwab first put his head above the parapet. But it's like I say, and I think the wonderful George Carlin summed it up. It's a big club, and we ain't in it. Yeah,
and how can they be in it? They're not even elected to their positions, but the power they wield is just tremendous.
Well, our own prime minister is not even elected to his position. You know, they're very clever. They, you know, they moved in Liz Truss, didn't they, as the 2IC to Boris Johnson, and then they very quickly shifted her sideways to make way for a World Economic Forum member whose annual income is 750 million. That's, you know, just on paper. Who has ties to companies like Infosys, who are still.
And he's also a safe pair of hands, which is what they always want, isn't it? You don't want anyone who asks questions.
Yeah, they're all puppets, mate. Basically, you know, they're puppets, and they get their little bit of kudos that comes in, and that's enough for them to continue the lie. You know, they're not accountable to the British people
or to law.
They're accountable to the big club, who bestow all these honors and privilege upon them, and make them feel like they're, oh my God, I'm on the world stage. Look how, and
they know about people like Kissinger. Probably the biggest criminal in the world, but he is still manipulating events, you know, 50 years on. It's just how, you know, I don't get that. He's another Tony Blair who should be serving his time.
Yeah, him. You've got George Soros. I mean, just the events in New York and Washington, you just got to look at the architects of it, you know. They all belong to the same club, and sadly, you're not going to understand this if all you do is watch your BBC 9 o'clock news, or is it 6 o'clock? I don't even watch TV, so I don't even know what it is, Paul. But
you know what, Chris, you mentioned the events of 20 years ago, I'm constantly berating myself. I was very slow on the uptake. It took me till about 2003 or 4 before I realised I should have been asking questions about those events,
That wasn't just some one-off random event. It's part, like I say, of a big agenda that's mapped out and planned out and preconceived years and years in advance.
Yes.
It ties into so much other implications, but off the back of which we just increasingly lose our freedom, the freedom that you fought for as a veteran, that I did as a veteran, and that all the other veterans out there did.
Yeah.
It's just they do stuff so incrementally, so slowly. This gradual erosion of freedom, these gradual world events that people just think are random one-off, but no, they slowly pushing to a point where we all become emasculated in our power, emasculated by our lack of knowledge, because society is just increasingly being dumbed down by this stupid shit that you see, on television.
I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. That
wow. You took the words out of my mouth, mate,
Yeah.
It's not just that it's insignificant shit that occupies the mind of the mindless. And I'm not saying it's not an interesting program. I've watched it myself, one of the few things on TV I actually watched because I love the psychological experiment. But in the grand scheme of the world, hang on a sec, we've all just been like locked in our houses for 2 years.
Yeah.
We've all been told that if you wear your underpants on your face, that will protect you from a bogeyman that many esteemed scientists would just laugh at. And how quickly we forget it because I'm a celebrity's on telly. And who do they have starring in the show? They have one of the arch puppets that was instrumental in meaning that if your loved one died, you couldn't even go to the bloody funeral. If you went to the funeral, you could just have like 5 people, or if your loved one was dying in a care home, you couldn't go and visit them. And how quickly. And all based on, there's no science behind this,
Not at all. But they have found some science recently, Matt, to say that anti-vaxxers are causing the vaccinated people to become unwell and to have heart attacks, and for their arteries to become constricted. But I don't know where they get that science from, because it looks like quack science to me.
Well, they own the media, don't they? And they control the media, so they can say what they want. And the average person in the street who's,
Yeah. Do let's hope the average person in the street sees the comedy value of that type of thing. I know it's a horrible subject, people dying of heart attacks, but to claim that what other people are saying is causing heart attacks, my first instinct is to laugh and then to think critically and to think they shouldn't be saying that. They can't get away with that. They've overstepped the mark. And let's hope the average person in the street thinks that as well and starts waking up,
Well, I think a lot of people have been forced to wake up because of the amount of casualties. It's impossible not to know people that have died.
Yes, that's right.
People that have got. We had a chap the other day on the podcast. He's waiting. I'll say this. I hope he's not, but in his words, Chris, I'm waiting to die. I got forced into a position through my job. I had to take something that I really didn't want to. And now it's just destroying me from the inside out. And it's just insanity perfected. It ignores the fact that as the human species, we're so bloody clever. We've We've been through ice ages. We've been through famine. We've been through destruction. We've been through scarcity. We've been through lack of resources. We've been through illness, etc., etc. But suddenly in the year 2022, the only way to fix ourselves is going to corporate trillionaires. Yeah. And like people can't tie, because the agenda is so incremental and it's slowly built up, and it's been brainwashing people over, hundreds of years. But the health narrative has particularly been brainwashing people for the last 150 years or thereabouts, because rather than take responsibility for your own health and do the things you need to do to be healthy, which is moderate exercise, eat a majority plant-based diet, or at least keep the other, the bad stuff in check, alcohol, etc., etc. Oh no, you only get ill from other people. It's just such a massive lie.
Oh, it's a huge lie. And they used to say human beings only use, I think it's 5% of the brain capacity or brain power. I swear that whoever's controlling these things want that figure to go down rather than go up, I suppose it's up to us to make sure it goes up, but it's been made so difficult, hasn't it, by events not just the last 3 years, but like you say, the last 150 years.
Just to finish off, what was it like coming back from the Falklands for you? What was your experience of that? Where did you sail back into Portsmouth?
Into Rosyth. Our ship was based in Rosyth. Yeah. So the very last thing we did was we were detailed to sail down to southern Thule. I don't know if you've heard of that island. It's one of the South Sandwich Islands. And it's got a bit of a reputation in sci-fi or conspiratorial sort of circles. There's people who are saying that there's an alien base down there and stuff like that. My mind's open to stuff like that, so I'll have a look. But we went down there in June the 20th, 1982, and we had a Royal Marine detachment on our ship, 12 guys. And you'll know this. They were rather frustrated having to stay on the ship while the war was going on, because they'd been sort of trained to get on land, not just be on ships and get on land. But they never got the permission to go on land. So eventually they did get that permission when we went down to Southern Thule. And in 1976, Southern Thule was invaded by Argentinian scientists, and there were about a dozen of them, and our lads went on shore, rounded them up. As soon as they put foot on the sand, there were white flags being, it was just totally defenseless. So there was just white flags raised as soon as they landed. They brought them back on the ship, and after that we sailed. Well, it's funny, while we were sailing down there, the sea was turning to ice. You could see particles coming together and getting bigger as we got further south. And some of the lads were saying, we're going to get frozen in here. Hope we've got enough food, to last 6 months. And all this sort of talk going on, but that didn't happen. Because a frigate is not an icebreaker, can't do that job as well. So anyway, we started sailing north, and we were given a date of around late July to get back into Rosyth. And I was still writing my diary as we headed back, and it took about 4 weeks, I think, to get back. And funnily enough, all our families were there. It was amazing. They were all there on the quayside as we sailed in, and we sailed under the 4th rail bridge, and then we came under the road bridge, and it was totally covered in people from end to end. There wasn't a space. Every space was occupied by people waving flags and everything. And now, if we just jump back a bit, there was a lad, Jock Muirhead, his name was. He was on HMS Yarmouth, And he left in late 1981, so before the invasion and everything, and he was fed up with the Navy. He said, I don't want to do this anymore. He's a big lefty, actually, a big left-winger, you know. I'm sick of these Tory bastards. I want to get the hell out of this, hell out of this Navy. And he went off, he joined another ship, and then he went down to HMS Nelson. I don't know if you've heard, it's in Portsmouth.
Pompey, yeah, been there probably thousands of times. That's the shore base
where you've got to go to do your leaving routine. So you get this little piece of card, and you've got to get stamped, you know. So he's chucking his kit back. Well, he's fed up, and he wants to get the hell out. Throwing his kit back and throwing his boots back and everything. And he gets to the day before. The day before he's about to leave was April the 1st, you know. You know what's coming up, don't you? April the 2nd, the invasion happens, and he kept him in. And
they kept him in?
He kept him in. And he said, right, you'll have to draft you to one of the merchant ships. And he sent him to the Atlantic Conveyor. So Jock Muirhead, instead of dressing up in his civic clothing, was sent down to the South Atlantic, and he ended up getting, his ship ended up getting sunk by an Exocet. 12 sailors killed. He jumped about 60 foot off the back end into the sea with his once only suit on. Managed to clamber into a life raft, and I learned recently he was floating around for about 6 hours before and there were a few of them in there. We've all seen that in the Cruel Sea or whatever, where they end up in a life raft, and you're thinking, Christ, this is it, we're going to die. You know, that was it, that was Jock Muirhead. Anyway, I'll jump forward again, and the first face I recognised on the quayside, everyone's waving like mad. One of them stood out, and he'd be jumping up like mad at the back. It was Jock Muirhead. He was there. He was there welcoming us back, you know, so we came on for a beer. So that was fantastic. And my mum was there, you know, and my girlfriend, all the family were there, you know, so, and everyone's families were there. It's a really emotional occasion, you know, to see everyone again, to survive. And at the same time, thinking about the lads who never made it, you know, always thinking about them. You never stop thinking about them, you know, like yourself, you know, you know what that's like. So,
yeah, I mean, for me, it's quite simple. Yeah, these individuals died fighting for our freedom, or at least,
yeah,
you know, but believing that's the cause, Paul. And we can't shit on them. And yet we're in a time of life now where that freedom has never, ever been more brought into question.
The more serving men and veterans that realise that they've been duped, the better, you know. The only similar thing I can think is when a lot of people, I've had mates who've joined the police. They've lasted a couple of months and then they're out, you know. They see what's going on. They get an idea of what's going on in the police, and they think, I can't do that, and they get the hell out. You know? So I'd like to see that happen, you know, in the forces, because we wouldn't have wars then. I'm not saying leave us defenceless, but let's just bloody get our heads together. Like I was saying before about the big brains we've got, we can use those brains for peace rather than killing each other and having our grandchildren kill each other in future, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Paul, listen, stay on the line so I can thank you properly. But for the purposes of the recording, can you just show us your book once more?
Yeah, it's here, mate.
Return to Bom Alley, 1982. Did you go back to the Falklands then?
No, I never went back. I never sort of had the...
So this is like a literal literature return.
Yeah, I had the inclination to go back, but I never had the finances to cover it. And then I sort of got married in 2006, and then I've got 2 young girls, and just I went through times where I was really hand to mouth. You know, I ended up selling my medal and my original diary for £1,000 on eBay. You know, I had to do stuff like that. Didn't want to do that. I offered it to the captain of the Ardent, who later became Admiral Alan West. I offered it to him by email, and he said, I understand why you're doing it, but I don't collect these things, so maybe you can find someone who can buy it, sort of thing. So, but I needed that money desperately. That's why I sold it.
I think there are organisations that can help fund you to return to the Falklands.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I should look at that,
Yeah. I think Nigel Spud Ely might be able to help you out.
Yeah.
There, I
okay.
can certainly put you in touch.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that.
No, thank you, Paul. What do we say here? Folks, I don't live my life for me. I've done that. I've seen a bit of the world. I've been in a few scrapes. But no, I'm utterly dedicated to the future of humanity, and by that I mean children and I ain't gonna get screwed over by no one, because I'm too fucking hard.
Yeah.
I'm a Royal Marines commando.
Yeah.
And we don't get fucked over by the likes of Klaus Schwab and his sissy mob of people that have never been through what you've been through, Paul.
Yeah.
Never been through what I've been through. They'd
never poo their pants, wouldn't they? If you put them on a battlefield,
they ain't going to put their lives on the line.
No.
No
chance.
They ain't going to be patrolling the streets of Belfast and have people shooting at them. It's they're laughing at us. They're laughing at us. And
yeah,
I would just encourage all, not just veterans, but serving personnel, to realize the game that is being played, and to acknowledge, if it wasn't for people like Paul that are brave enough to stand up outside of the narrative and say, hey folks, look, have you considered this? Did you know this? Did you know, anyone can go along with a narrative, dust your medals out and your blazer and salute the Queen. If you really want to remember your fallen comrades and the sacrifice that they made, or at least they believed they was, you got to stand up against evil.
That's right.
You've got to put your own ego aside and go, hang on, look,
that's
I think
right.
what these guys are saying, that I think there's something in this.
Yeah.
And
when you're saluting you said the Queen, but when you're saluting the King now, you've got to look at his associations.
Well, exactly.
Because he is associated to the WEF as well.
He's associated to the WF. He's also associated to some undesirables, like, for example, Jimmy Savile.
Yes.
Rolf Harris, Jeffrey Epstein, okay, that's his brother, but let's not split hairs, folks. This is a big club.
And Mrs. Thatcher was seeing Jimmy Savile as early as 1979, New Year, 1979. She saw him 11 times, so 79 right through to 90 when she departed. So pre-Falklands War, and we've got no record, no minutes, no recordings, nothing. We don't know what was talked about. We really don't know if she was going to him for advice about God knows what. And he was never security vetted either, which has got to raise some really serious questions about everything, really. How does he get so close to royalty and to the Prime Minister?
Also, Paul, you don't think the intelligence services knew all about this guy?
Yeah.
Clearly, like the leading figure on British tech. Of course, they knew everything about him.
Absolutely.
Same as they did, certain politicians who had certain yachts that went across to certain islands, we could say, where there were children's homes. They know all this stuff, but it's it's just a twisted dark web of deceit and evil, and
we can't be put off by it being dark and twisted. We've got to go there and deal with it, I think, to expose it, because I think that's what they want. It's so bloody horrible that they rely upon us running away from it. We shouldn't do that.
Paul, listen, we're going to put a link to your book below. Like I say, just stay on the line, brother. But thank you so much for having the courage to say your truth. And that's all we do in life, isn't it? We say our truth.
Yeah.
And we don't get kowtowed, or we don't get intimidated. It is getting worse. They are trying to up the narrative. You can see that.
Yeah.
You got people on remote Polynesian islands.
Yeah.
That have never seen a Westerner, yet they're wearing their underpants on their face and jumping into bushes when their next door neighbor walks past. This is the power of the club.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just encourage all veterans out there, just come on, folks, come on.
Do you know what, Chris? I think they're going to overstep the mark at some point and suggest something that is so ridiculous that people will just know. You know what I mean? I mean, they've come close with this latest thing where they're suggesting that
so many people are getting ill now off. Let's just say their choices in life.
Yeah. There's been a big move that we're no longer conspiracy theorists. We're like killers. If we're open, if we want to debate these issues, we're being branded as killers now. That's only just come out. I don't know how they can make this stand, because in the past, like you were saying, they were putting the fear of God into us, locking us down, not letting us see our families. People were dying and without seeing the families, all that going on. But there were no heart attacks being caused by that sort of stress. All of a sudden, it's us causing the stress.
It gets deeper, Paul. People watching now, for the vast majority, will not be aware that a Freedom of Information request was submitted to the government. Okay, so that's the Office of National Statistics. And they said, listen, over this 1.5 year period, which is basically like what's happened in the last 2 years, how many people have actually died from the old, like, Scovey, Macadovey?
Yeah.
How many actual under the age of 35?
Yeah.
It's literally, don't quote me here, folks, you know my memory, but it's something like 10.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I can
that's even if you believe that's the cause of ill health, which is another narrative again. But if you actually want to go down the BBC official route, that's what we're talking about, folks. You can find this online if you care to look. You can find it online. How many people died from this thing? Yes, you are hearing this correctly. Less than 10 people.
Yeah.
We're not talking about people that had diabetes, underlying heart conditions, they're elderly, they're in a home, You know, when you get ill because you've not looked after yourself, you know, you haven't done those things you need to do in life, which is eat a healthy diet, moderate exercise, Yeah. We're talking about how many people, and that surprises people, because if you pose that question to individuals and say, look, how many people do you think have actually died, like of this thing, like just this thing, not they go, probably 200,000. No, maybe 300,000. No, less than 10. And if anyone wants to take me to task on that, come on the podcast, right? And I will demonstrate it to you. All right. I didn't travel 85 countries across all 7 continents to be like normal.
Yeah.
I did that because I wanted exceptional knowledge on a higher level.
Yeah.
Which has allowed me to access an area of life that I just never thought was available to me. And it's called enlightenment.
Yes.
You know, and it's a bloody great place to be. It means I don't hate people anymore.
Yeah.
It means I don't want for anything anymore. Yeah, sure. If you want to give me a Ferrari, I'll burn that around the block. I like cars.
Yeah.
I don't need it though. You know?
Yeah.
I don't need it. So long as I can pay my bills and then get out with my family and smile in the sun, that's all I give a shit of. It's all that matters, you know? That is all that matters. But
you know what, Chris, I've since the start of this thing, I've been going to a stand in the park meeting.
Yes.
And there's 50 of us, roughly, and we go to Birkenhead Park by the Cafe Cream, and we meet there every Sunday at 10 p.m. And I'm just putting it out there. Not on Twitter, it's at SITP Birkenhead. That's our handle on Twitter. So if anyone wants to join us, you know, drop us a line.
Definitely.
Very welcome.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because our local stand in the park, which I will go and try and support as often as I can.
Yeah.
Is run by a chap called Mark. Hello, Mark, and much love to you, brother. And he's a former Matlow.
Oh, right. Okay, good on him.
He's a chef, but we're not going to hold that against him, you know?
Yeah.
No, seriously. Navy chefs, Royal Marine chefs.
He kept us going.
Hey, best in the world, mate. Best in the world. It's all changed now, though. It's all private companies that come in. They give you these shitty little like box meal crap.
Oh no!
Or you get a little bit off. It's nothing like what we experienced. You know.
Oh my God!
Again, this conditioning of the human experience to be so much crapper than what it could be. But yes, folks, stand in the park. But I do feel that all this is coming together now.
Yeah.
I do feel people have had enough. I think people, when you see your own loved ones getting hurt or no longer being here, it's a wake-up call to go, I think we've been lied to. And that is, I hope, Paul, that is for people what the events in New York and Washington were to me. All right? They woke me up and I'm like, right, that don't work, do it? That narrative is a massive, massive. Brother, massive love to you, Paul. Let's stay in touch.
Chris. Yeah.
Let's stay in touch. I wish you all the best with your book.
Thanks for inviting me on the show. Really appreciate it. Big respect to you as well.
Well, you know, mate, I only do it for the children. It's that simple. Yeah. I'm a Royal Marines commando.
Yeah.
Right? It's that simple. I ain't no fucking pussy to these. Don't want to say the word, but people know the word that I can't say. Right? It's that simple. Right? I swore an oath, and I don't care what it said in the oath, but it was basically, I'm going to protect you, and I will die doing it. Right? We have a core ethos, right? And that ethos, you know, without getting into the intricacies of it, is we do what is right, not what is easy, right?
Yeah.
We do what is right. We don't do what is easy. And Paul, let's chat soon, brother.
Okay, mate. Thanks a lot.
Everyone at home, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Please put your thoughts, your comments below. You maybe got your own views on the Falklands. You maybe got your own views on what's going on. It would be lovely if you could support Paul and leave a nice comment, because guys like this don't come around that often, folks, you know. And when they do, they need to be recognized that, okay, it upsets, you know, it's going to break a bit of China, but what essentially in the long run is the best for us all? Do we just shut up about things, or do we question things and go forward and build a better better future for all of us. Massive love. Please like and subscribe. We're going to see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. See you soon, mate.
Welcome, brother. You are very, very welcome.
Cheers.